it or not. Entirely up to them, obviously. So welcome to the second Daniels Fund Program in Professional Ethics. I am Sandy Woodson. I'm the director of the Ethics Across Campus program at Mines. And Chin Zhu is going to join us, but he may or may not be able to join us later. He's the co-director of the Daniels Fund in Professional Ethics, and Dr. Stephen Ray, who is up here, and he is a postdoc researcher who's working with Dr. Zhu, and he does SDS stuff, and he's very cool. There's Chin. Hi, Chin. I was just kind of introducing you. 2 weeks ago, we had a fantastic session with Dr. Matt Winia about pandemic ethics, and tonight we're excited to welcome Dr. Ashley Shew from Virginia Tech. She's going to be giving a lecture titled Disability Technologies, Ethical Pitfalls, and Social Responsibilities. As with our first lecture, you are invited to submit questions via the chat feature on Zoom. At the end of Dr. Shew's talk, Stevie will collect the questions and present them to Dr. Shew, and he may combine them or whatever. Now that logistics are handled, it's time to turn to the lecture. Dr. Shew is an associate professor of science, technology, and society at Virginia Tech with a team of graduate and undergraduate students. Here comes, I believe, the cat. Excellent. She is currently, now I'm all addled. Hold on. She currently studies the stories disabled people tell about technology with the help of an NSF Career Award. She also works with a team from Engineering Education on the experiences of disabled civil engineering students as a part of an interdisciplinary graduate education program on regenerative medicine. She centers her work in philosophy of technology with strong interests in animal studies, disability studies, bioethics, and emerging technologies. Dr. Shew is the author of Animal Constructions and Technological Knowledge, co-editor of 3 Philosophy of Technology volumes, and serves as co-editor-in-chief of the academic journal Techne, Research in Philosophy and Technology. So please join the Daniels Fund Program, the Division of Humanities, Arts, Social Sciences, and Ethics across the campus in welcoming Dr. Shew. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to your talk.
And now the traditional way that we begin things, can you see my screen? Is my first question for you guys. Can I get a thumbs up?
Yes, we can see.
Oh, perfect, wonderful. Thank you so much to my hosts here at Colorado School of Mines, to Chin Zhu, Sandra Woodson, and Stephen Ray for setting this up. It's an honor to be here with you tonight. I'm coming to you live from the land of the Tutelo Monacan people, a land granted without permission of its traditional people. Virginia Tech, like Colorado School of Mines, is a land-grant institution. More specifically, I am coming to you from my home, which is a delight because I don't have to travel, and traveling as a disabled person can be a lot of extra hassle. In that vein, if you'd like to catch me individually, I can put my link to my office hours tomorrow if anyone wants to catch me after the talk individually, but can't do so since we're on Zoom. So I want to start this talk about disability technologies, ethical pitfalls, and social responsibilities with an anecdote. I was lucky at my first disability studies meeting to be befriended really hard by another amputee. A leg amputee like me and enthusiastic about disability studies. In fact, there were no other leg amputees in attendance, so we had found our type. And since then, Mallory and I hit the Amputee Coalition national meeting sometimes together. I'm always struck by what I couldn't have known without community. You end up walking through the conference hotel and looking at everyone to check out which limb they are missing, and it feels weird to see the 4 limbers. For once, they are the ones out of place as we commune with one another in hotel bars, in patches on the carpet in the hotel lobby, in smoking areas, and wherever we can spread out. We spread ourselves over space with various adaptive equipment, wheelchairs, arms, legs, stubbies, crutches, canes, walkers. There are so many ways to be an amputee, and so many tools we can use. My friend Mallory talks about this as being transmobile, that amputees have more choices about how we move our bodies in space than non-disabled people do. Too often, of course, we're directed as disabled people to hold on as tightly as possible to normalcy, to normalize our bodies, to use the right technologies If we're autistic, to look people in the eyes when we speak. If we're deaf, to put hearing aids in our ears, to overcome something, though I'm not always sure what it is, to be a model for others. And too often these messages are intensified as we put ourselves under medical and engineering scrutiny, sometimes without wanting to. Many disabled people are approached in public with questions about their bodies. At one point, I was having a great day and some physical therapist stopped me. They were not my physical therapist. I was just out hanging out with some friends and they wanted to give me advice on how to walk better. I did not know this person, stranger danger, and frankly, I didn't mind my limp. My body wasn't asking for their intervention. I was having a regular day out. Other amputees I know have been approached in grocery stores and asked why they aren't wearing their prostheses or told they are inappropriate when they go out without it covered, when we're talking about their residual limbs. Others may come to believe that they are deficient, that they should go out less if they aren't masters of the right technologies. So talking about disability technologies, ethical pitfalls, and social responsibilities is a personal topic for me, but also one that I study as a humanities scholar who works with scientists and engineers sometimes, and who thinks about the stories we tell ourselves that motivate the projects we engage in. I should note that this material is based on work supported by the National Science Foundation, because they really like it when I tell you that, but it does not represent their views. Okay, just my disclaimer there. So my plan for this talk is to give you some background beyond just anecdote. In parts A and B here, I'll talk about the narratives that shape living life as a disabled person and how disabled people from a variety of communities resist current technological solutionism about their bodies and minds. Of course, not all disabled people believe the same things or have the same feelings about anything I talk about today. And I do say disabled person because I identify with person first language. I identify with identity first language instead of person first language. And being disabled to me is a neutral descriptor of what I am. And it's a lot shorter than telling you that I'm a hard of hearing, chemobrain, rotationplasty amputee with tinnitus and Crohn's disease. Whew. I also see being disabled as a political identity, one foisted onto how people read me, whether or not I agree to it. I know a lot of people are taught person first language, people vary in their preferences, and you should always follow the lead of the disabled person you're speaking to when you choose your language. In parts C and D, I want to talk directly to the engineers in the room about trying to be ethical. Once I've put you in the dilemma you may feel once I've finished parts A and B, you might be upset with me if I didn't address how to handle what might be new information. I think knowing the context of one's actions is necessary to being socially responsible, especially since engineers have so much more power to shape human life than many practitioners do. It becomes particularly incumbent then to understand the context in which your actions take place as a matter of social justice and professional ethics. I'm grateful to get to talk to you because I know how much power you have. So, the context. I'm going to talk about stories told about disabled people, narrative tropes, and then I'm going to talk about disability tech news coverage briefly. I could do this as a historical background. I'm not going to, but we could. So, life as a disabled person is often lived against the backdrop of media tropes. People assume things about you. What people often imagine about you is framed by social, cultural, and religious tropes. These are often reflected in media. What people think you need is often framed by these tropes, and they will try to push it on you. The technologies we develop and how we talk about those technologies often reflect these stereotypes. So what are these sorts of stereotypes? And these don't work in every case. So particularly if you're a blind Black man, people are going to think you have spiritual gifts and that you're extra musical. So when I talk about the media tropes, sometimes there are specific tropes that apply to specific populations. These are some general categories for disability narrative. Not every disabled person falls into these or is cast into these rather than falling. And a lot of people resist these tropes in their lives. But these are the ways we see disability depicted, particularly when we're talking about entertainment, but also just news stories about disability. And sort of collective understandings that get reflected in media, fit a limited number of frames. So these frames are pitiable freaks, right? When we talk about what freak shows are, you should find people hideous in particular ways, but also they might be objects of your pity and charity. The second one is moochers and fakers. Disabled people are scrutinized because people don't believe we're really disabled. The third one is bitter cripples. Any story that features a hand amputee has a bitter cripple in it. I'm sorry, Captain Hook. I don't know why that is, but it is a common trope, particularly for amputees, to be bitter cripples that were somehow, and the bitterness is about being disabled. The fourth is shameful sinner. The sinning can be on the part of your mother or father or on the part of you. This isn't one that's gone. You see this in different religious tropes. Harriet McBride Johnson has this line in her book, Accidents of Nature, where she says she wishes there was just one story in the Bible where the crip didn't get cured because then people would leave her alone. The fifth one is inspirational overcomers. This might be the one you're most familiar with if you've been working on disability technologies. Part of what engineers try to do is help people overcome their disabilities through science and technology. This is a narrative we see a lot in media. But you'll notice with all of these media tropes, disability is cast as brokenness or aberration. It tells us that either something is wrong, or in the case of number 5, something was wrong. And disability in all of these cases warrants your scrutiny, your dismissal, your intervention, or your commentary in some way. It prompts something in people. So I often find it handy to show these representations in terms of, you got it, memes people share on the internet. This kind of like tells you I'm a millennial right now. I just gave it away. That was the surprise. But anyway, I really enjoy meme culture, and I hope Sandy puts her cat back on in just a second. Oh, I can actually see the cat in the background. I'm calmed by it. Perfect. If you could get some large text above the cat with its thoughts, that would really help me out here. Anyway, so here are some of the tropes reflected in media. So if we start around 9 o'clock, then we see he asked her to prom, even in her condition. Like and share equals respect, and has a little person who's a wheelchair user next to a young Black man who is wearing a white suit, and they are holding hands, obviously ready to go to the prom together. These sorts of things get circulated in the media every year. Actually, it was really nice with the pandemic. They did not get circulated in the media this year. And it was, I guess that's my silver lining with the pandemic, is that we didn't have all these terrible prom stories where it seems like people are being nice. But the story is that the disabled person was so pitiable that someone had to pity date them. And then it makes national news. Can you imagine being a high schooler and having your pity date on the front page of your local paper, right? When we think about what this means for the object of this pity, it's actually pretty gross. Next to that, I have a screenshot of the I Am Autism commercial, which was actually too terrible to have a meme about it. A lot of autistic activists consider Autism Speaks a hate group. And if you look up this commercial, it's you'll see why. So this is a commercial that actually ran until autistic people caused a flurry of concernment about it. And it has this voiceover that goes, "I am autism. I'll break up your marriage. I'll make it so you can never go out to dinner at a fancy restaurant." It like lists all the ways in which, because you have an autistic child, your life is going to be terrible, before it like has some happy music. And then it has like, I'm a parent, I'm a grandparent, I'm a sister and brother, and we're going to fight autism. Now, if you're an autistic person who sees autism as part of their personality and part of who they are in a fundamental way, and you're told that people want to eliminate autism, it sounds a lot like they want to eliminate you. So you can kind of see how that folds out. But the sort of pitiable object that gets painted in order to stir up funding for Autism Speaks and other charities. You should also know the Muscular Dystrophy Association gets regularly protested by people who are adults with muscular dystrophy, some of which used to be children who were featured by the Muscular Dystrophy Association, right? Okay. All right. So the second trope of moochers and fakers, you'll see in the corner across, Snarky Wonka. Classic, right? And it says, bless your heart, trying to get disability benefits. I don't think lazy is a disability. So anyone who applies for any type of disability payment, SSI, SSDI, but also if you just have like a permit for your car so you can park in a place that's slightly closer to wherever you are going, the number of people who will give you scrutiny and grief to try to figure out if you really are disabled and really deserve it is actually really striking. I have a friend who has fibromyalgia and has chronic pain. She remarks on what a pleasure it is when we go places together because I can park in the ADA spots. She has a tag, she doesn't use it because she's been almost assaulted in a parking lot because someone didn't think she was really disabled. Yes, she can ambulate, but she actually is in a lot more pain than I am on a daily basis. But she likes going places with me because we can park in a nice place, and because I'm literally missing a chunk of my body, people don't give me as much grief about it. So that's what you have to do in order to get through sometimes. There's also bitter cripples. You'll see in the other corner below the prom picture, Gary Sinise playing a double amputee in Forrest Gump. He's not a hand amputee. Nonetheless, this amputee is bitter about being disabled. And that's sort of a trope we see in a lot of media. Disabled villains are throughout so many things. We also see the trope of shameful sinners. This one might be surprising to you because it's the picture with Frosted Flakes in it. And it says, new Frosted Flakes with marshmallows, free diabetes in every box. So shameful sinners, we currently have a lot of moralizing about health, which means that a lot of the shameful sinning that gets cast in terms of disability right now has to do with people not behaving in the correct way and being blamed for their own disabilities, despite the fact that we know that there are many factors that go into being disabled. And the fifth one, and here is the running blade, so all the engineers are like, this is gonna be swell. It says the only disability in life is a bad attitude. This is a quote from Scott Hamilton, and it has a young girl and a man on running blades looking happy. This particular trope sometimes gets called inspiration porn. You'll see the picture of Stella Young, her TED Talk, I'm not your inspiration, thank you very much, critiques that image in the middle there, as well as others that get that particular phrase overlaid on it. And inspiration porn uses this brave overcomer or courageous battler praise about disabled people who are doing what society takes as the right way for a disabled person to perform their role as disabled. This, of course, implies that to be good disabled people, we have to be fighting against our bodies or minds in some ways. We're overcoming something, we're battling something. And inspiration porn takes disabled people as objects to inspire other people. And this objectification is why we call it porn. No one has to take off their clothes for this. It's the objectification that's being done with if you are Googling it, Google inspiration porn, don't Google disability porn. You will get something different than you expected, right? So it's inspiration if you want the term, or just Google Stella Young and then no one can blame me for what has popped up on their browser. Perfect. There are downsides in this narrative. It might seem like the most positive one, but the downsides are it treats disabled people as exceptional individuals rather than community members of an underrepresented minority who may need access and accommodations to be in public. It asks us to live for other people, and it works against inclusive design and disability rights. We shouldn't have to be at our best. We shouldn't have to be athletic to be allowed to participate. It reminds me of, we found out I was getting an amputation for cancer, and people were like, oh, are you gonna take up running? What? Like it's so infused in our culture that people think, oh, you're going to become an amputee, you got to get a running leg, because the way to be an amputee is to get a running leg and run. I've tried running with 2 legs and it was terrible. So I don't even, like, these people were my friends. Why would they even think that I was going to start running? That seems bad. But it's part of this, like, what you expect. Like certain particular types of disabled people are sort of cast as inspiration. It also exceptionalizes, inspiration porn exceptionalizes rather than normalizes disability. When disability is a normal facet of the human experience. Disabled people make up 20% of the population, and these things exaggerate how different we are than normal. It suggests that we have to do this fighting thing instead of setting people up for adaptation or to think about their bodies as spaces for creative thinking, about how to participate and how to try out different things. It can really be annoying too. I've been standing at a grocery store picking out ears of corn, which is literally the least inspirational activity a person can do. But I was wearing shorts. So a stranger approached me and wanted to tell me I was such an inspiration. Of course, I replied that I was just picking out corn, and I made the social situation extremely awkward for both of us in that moment. She had to then insist that I really was being inspirational, and I had to insist that I was really picking out corn. So I want to tell you that all your faves are problematic. Your feel-good news stories don't feel so good in this context. Here are a few headlines rather than screenshots. The tech giving people the power to deal with disability. How technology will change the lives of people with disabilities. First prosthetic limb designed for women, with the tagline, and we'll talk about this in a moment, I feel liberated. And then robotic exoskeletons are here, and they're changing lives, right? So this technology is supposed to do this work on disabled people to help us deal with it and to help change our lives as if our lives are terrible and need changing immediately. I talk about this as techno-ableism, and techno-ableism, of course, ableism is bias against disabled people or in favor of non-disabled ways of being. Ableism is part of how we make judgments and value particular forms of communication, intelligence, professionalism, our ideas about rigor and lifestyle, and it influences what we build and how we build it and how we organize our lives and societies. So it's sort of a big thing. And we see it in the marketing about disability technologies. We're told things are going to empower us, as if without the help of technology, we can't feel empowered. Disabled people are told everything will change our lives. We can never just hope for incremental change, which is something I actually like a lot more. And it's seen in the dearth of stories about disabled designers. Disabled people are always the recipients in the stories, but never the helpers helping other people. Even when we tell the story, this is a side rant that I will try not to go down. Even if we tell the story of Helen Keller, we often forget that Annie Sullivan, her teacher, was a blind woman, legally blind woman, sent by Perkins School for the Blind, because blind people usually help other blind people learn how to navigate as blind people. Surprise. Right, so we actually lose the story because we're told this able-bodied person. Now, Annie Sullivan and Helen Keller were friends throughout their lives. They wrote socialist literature together. They corresponded with different people. They were, to have and even Helen Keller's biography, like the biography of her life that gets made into a movie, it's called The Miracle Worker. And Helen Keller, the main character, isn't the miracle worker in this scenario. Okay, right, all right, I'm gonna let that one go, but ooh, it's a bad one. So CRIPS, which is what sometimes disabled people who call themselves, you probably shouldn't pick it up if you're not disabled as a word to call disabled people, just by the way, CRIPS talk back about this. So I kind of mention 4 technologies here, but this exists for lots of different things. CRIP is a word that can be a verb and a noun, just like queer in the LGBT community, and people sometimes enjoy saying it. Yes, it's a derivative of cripple. That's why it's being reclaimed. Okay. So Bill Peace wants to talk about this culture of walking, and especially if you talk about engineers and disabled people, images of disabled people surrounded by engineers are not uncommon in media about disability tech. So Bill Peace, who blogs under the name The Bad Cripple, writes, your typical bipedal person exposed to a barrage of misleading news stories is led to believe all paralyzed people share one goal in life, walking. Please cue the soaring inspirational music accompanied by the brave and noble young man or woman struggling to walk, surrounded by healthcare professionals, computer scientists, and engineers who all share the same ritualized ideal. The flip side of the obsession with walking is not discussed. No one wants to talk about the gritty reality people who cannot walk are forced to navigate. No one wants to think about the barriers to healthcare and appropriate adaptive technology. Disability must be placed in a larger context. It requires new ways of looking at disability. In reply to a paraplegic man kicking off at the World Cup in the 2012 World Cup, it's not Olympics. Some sports fans going to be angry at me right now. They had a roundup of different bloggers who were talking about exoskeletons. Red Nichols writes, "So, hey, able-bodied media, quit making me feel like wheelchairs are a shitty subpar option. Stop beating your exoskeleton drum. And most of all, let go of your obsession with walking because it's totally overrated." Shane Clifton writes, "Apart from the fact that the kick was insipidly embarrassing, traveling all of 2 meters, the device was a monstrosity. I have absolutely no desire to try it. If science wants to help me out, it should concentrate its research on the bladder and bowel and do something about nerve pain and spasm." And then, of course, Bill Peace, "I would urge paralyzed people to boycott this device. Screw the exoskeleton, screw walking. Give me a good wheelchair, an excellent wheelchair cushion, and some adaptive sports equipment so one can remain in excellent physical health. Better yet, get paralyzed people a job. Forget about the exoskeleton." So here he's thinking of different challenges that people's bodies have. And in fact, not all wheelchair users are paralyzed. So the exoskeleton is not a solution to wheelchair use as it is sometimes cast. I also had a really good class one time. We were looking at an exoskeleton and one student piped up and goes, "How do you poop in that?" Because a lot of them aren't made to do basic things like sit on a toilet, right? And here we have the headline, "First prosthetic limb designed for women. I feel liberated." This is from a BBC News program. And they actually have the amputee interviewed along with the person who made her hand. And the quote, "I feel liberated," is not about the hand. Even though that is the headline, when you actually go and you watch the story, the woman does like the arm. But she's talking about how she can use the arm to ride a bicycle. And you know how literally everyone feels when they ride a bicycle? It's liberated. Riding a bicycle is liberating, right? And having this hand that could grip the handlebars, she could ride better on it. Lots of arm amputees, even if they don't have other hands, like a bicycle riding arm, so that you can actually steer a bicycle and it's not really hard on one arm. It's a practical tool. So yeah, first prosthetic limb designed for women. The headline, the quote that they chose, like, is intentionally not listening to the disabled person that they're interviewing in ways that are really irritating. And the question becomes, who are prosthetic hands for? Catherine Campbell, in this New York parenting blog, talks about an exchange she has with her 5-year-old son. She says, "We're sitting on the couch and he turns towards me. 'I've been thinking about it,' he says, 'and I don't want a new hand.' But why? I was devastated. All that time, research, and enthusiasm. He was throwing away a chance to have a 5-fingered hand." He was quiet for a moment and then started to explain his 3 reasons. First of all, he said, he didn't want to lose his sense of touch. "I don't want to lose the way it feels." This caught me off guard. I hadn't thought about how much he could physically feel at the tip of his wrist, how stifled it was under something like plastic. "I could figure out how to do stuff on my own." That was true. Thaddeus had figured out how to leverage his arms, feet, and neck to open jars, marker and pen caps, and even play baseball. "My brain just works different because of my hand, and I think that's a good thing. And my friends like me just the way I am," he said. If he started wearing a new hand, he explained, it would draw more attention to him, the kind he didn't want. "I don't think kids would be my friend because of me. They would just want to play with my robot hand." "So is it okay," he asked, "that I don't want a hand?" And here we have disability studies scholar Rosemary Garland Thompson in a book called Staring, in a chapter called Hands, which is about staring at hands. She says, "The mechanical hand answers the needs of the wearer, whereas the cosmetic hand answers the needs of the starer." So the reasons people get arm and hand prostheses is actually really complicated by the fact that if you're an arm amputee, people will remark on it. You'll be asked what happened, and there are more congenital arm amputees than leg amputees. So a lot of times the answer is, I was born, and it's not a good shark story. Although they will make those up for you so that you leave them alone. I love arm amputees. All right, Rura Mae Williams on the subject of technologies for autism says, technologies for autism are dominated by meta-eugenic via the logics of the interventional. These normalizing technologies seek to correct aberrant behaviors, shape normative social responses, and remediate deficits and delays. This approach seems natural and necessary from the perspective of the helping professions, guided by a conviction that their role is to deliver health and wellness, a restoration or purification via the equation of the norm with health. The logic behind such interventions is that access is conditional upon whether the body is includable. So the goal when it comes to autism technologies here is to intervene in ways that if society were shaped differently would be unnecessary. Jaypreet Verdi, in her new book that just came out, I had it out, there's a plug. I got to interview her about it, and she said, this is from the interview, the problem with this rhetoric, which is about, and the rhetoric she details is about curing deafness, and she shares a history of hearing devices and surgeries. The problem is that it constantly promotes the idea that deafness is something that needs to be fixed, whether through medicine or technology. In all of these, there lies the idea that you have to fix it, have to be cured, rather than just accepting it. And that becomes problematic. I think this does something to you, and it makes deafness constantly stigmatized. It also makes it difficult for deaf and hard of hearing people to advocate for themselves, because so many messages from advertising, from engineers, from medicine, tells them as deaf people that there's something wrong with them. That starts to seep into a person's psyche. So I've given you some problems, and I'm so sorry, but here's what I don't want you to do. So I've given you some context for worrying about whatever disability helping project you've been thinking about. I think there are ways to engage in more socially responsible modes. What we have right now is a lot of social irresponsibility around the stories we tell about disability technology. And we talk about things like the end of disability. But here's the thing, whether through diseases or through climate change, or even if we made it there, the ravages of space on our bodies, we would and should expect more disabled people in the future, rather than assuming we should work towards eliminating disability as a concept. There may be some chronic illness, chronic pain conditions, and life-shortening situations that we really do want cured, right? I don't speak for every type of disability here, but surely we want to think about how to include people with disabilities that doesn't involve an individual approach, because we want to think about how to live in the future among other people, and we need to accept that that future is going to be disabled. Stevie and Sandy were looking at the sky and remarking about the wildfires right before this talk. And I was like, ooh, it's going to make more disabled people. And not just because that's my bread and butter, y'all, but because, this is something that we should all be concerned with. And disability is one of those categories you can become. You can be born, you can become, you can fall in and out of it when we talk about temporary and intermittent sorts of conditions. So we need a different mindset here. What not to do. Not what not to wear, but I went with it. Okay, a few notes on what not to do. The first of those is disability simulation. You might think, after hearing this, well, you need to find out what it's like to be a disabled person. And let me tell you, disability simulation is not a way to find out what it's like to be a disabled person. Disability simulation is this practice where you spend a day in a disabled person's shoes, with activities performing, blindfolded to find out what it might be like to be blind, or using a wheelchair to try to get around, or using a suit to simulate old age now, or even using virtual reality to see through another's eyes. These practices are actually quite bad when you look at the sociological evidence. Norio Redmond has a whole bunch of writing on this, and the outcomes really aren't as expected. The objections here are threefold. Disability simulations actually lead to negative perceptions about the competence of disabled people because participants are feeling what it's like to be disabled on the first day of being disabled. You're not going to be good at being blind on your first day of being blind. In fact, you might think it must be really hard to be blind if you've experienced what it's like on your first day of being blind. That's obvious, right? So you haven't had time to master and adapt. So of course it's going to make you think that disabled people are actually less competent. The second is that disability simulations make non-disabled people think they know what it's like, such that they don't have to interact with actual disabled people and can talk over them about their experiences in order to design better because they think they know better. What is salient in the experience for a non-disabled person in disability simulation, say how hard it is to push a manual wheelchair up a curb cut, might actually not be a focal part of the disabled person's experience because they've built up the right arm strength and have done a lot of curb cuts before. The third point here is that disability simulations actually homogenize the experience of disability. Most of us have more than one, and will acquire more than one as we age in a sooner fashion than non-disabled people. Just using a wheelchair might tell you very little about how someone experiences the disability that makes them want to use a wheelchair, or the variety of ways in which their disabilities impact them. What they take as focal, as a focal concern, might not even be the same as someone with the same disability. So what else not to do? Don't design for disability, by which I mean don't take disability as the object. Make sure community members lead or have a wide voice in what you work on. This is related to don't treat disabled people as objects or problems, as we've seen in some of the tropes. Engaging in disability design should be in the framing of Liz Jackson, who's sometimes called the accessible Liz Jackson, designing with disability, with ideally in terms of team members who have the relevant disability or are part of communities that matter to the research. This is long-term engagement. And this is where the exoskeleton complaints arise so easily. So often these are made with military funding, with disability as the humanitarian cover for what is a project that has an end, not with being worn by disabled people, but as their primary means of mobility, although they could be a useful tool, maybe, but in military might. That's the end goal if the Department of Defense is funding your exoskeleton project. Engineers are praised for working on disability-related technologies, so it's important to emphasize not reifying paternalistic views that you know what's best, or entering into these environments with a savior complex. That is, that you are going to help save those poor people with disabled people as pitiable freaks in one of our tropes. I also think there's a moral failing in like a lack of imagination here. Like Mallory talking about transmobility and what we like, and concepts like disability gain, like there is something we gain from this experience. I think some of the ethical pitfalls have to do with this. When we use techno-ableist frames, we reify tropes about disability. We actually fail to recognize the structures in which disabled bodies operate. This can mean commercial failure. This is what happened to the iBot walking wheelchair that Dean Kamen put out onto the market. It got classified as a transportation device instead of mobility equipment, so no insurance, no Medicaid, Medicare, no one would even partially fund it. So the iBot was only in production for 2 years. They're trying to reboot the iBot, because people actually did like it. You can make good disability technologies that absolutely fail because you don't know the conversation, the larger scale of how disability technology is understood and employed. An exoskeleton might only seem like a necessity if we're not doing basic repair on infrastructure and upholding a 30-year-old law like the Americans with Disabilities Act. The perception of a technology can also make it fail. So many technologies aimed at older people, even when they would be useful, have stigma associated with them. Hearing aids, canes, and walkers are some of our best examples of this. Hearing aids have a double punch. Insurances won't cover them usually, and they can be costly, and they have stigma associated with them. And we use less good versions of crutches, underarm crutches in the United States, when forearm crutches are mechanically superior, put less wear and tear on your joints, and are what crutch-related sports are played on because you can move in much more dynamic ways. However, because forearm crutches have a stigma associated with polio and with cerebral palsy and other long-term disability, what we see employed instead of forearm crutches are underarm ones. And those are just the defaults in the United States. A third point here, the failure to imagine different ways of being as good or as freeing also becomes a moral failure when you push that belief about what is good onto the bodies of other people. My friend Mallory expresses it best when she talks about the options we really do have and how to think creative and cool ways. When we even talk about things like running blades or tentacle arms, what we're talking about is people who challenge dominant ideas about what a prosthetic could be, and actually came out with better designs because of that. So social responsibility and ethics, what should you do? I have a few points here, and then I'll be done. Listen to the disability community and recognize the larger context in which the technology will be deployed. Respect disabled people as experts when you're using their know-how, contextual knowledge, and community knowledge, which means pay your disabled consultants and collaborators and give them credit where it's due. This might mean publishing with disabled people or working through other avenues to approach technologies that you might be interested in. Don't exploit your disabled friends and neighbors. Recognize them as experts. Too often, the architects at my university, one of them I was like, did you have any, wheelchair? Did you get any input from disabled people about this monstrosity you just created? And the architect was like, yeah, I know a guy who uses a wheelchair. So I had him come meet me here. And I was like, did you pay him for his consulting? And the architect said no. And I was like, is he involved with the disability community? The architect said no. And it seemed like a bad situation for all concerned. I don't think even his parking was paid for. What else to do? Make sure disabled voices are centered in coverage about any project you are working on when it concerns disability, and that they get the story right. And it's not, I feel liberated, and it was always about biking. Of course, everyone thinks that. And what to do? There will be some projects you shouldn't do, or that you should make space to support and advance disabled people in your field to do. This means promoting and recruiting and working to retain disabled people in your professional group, which may mean challenging norms in your discipline about what constitutes professionalism, rigor, and ideas about normative time and space. And ideally, you're using humility rather than empathy, right? Empathy is what we get from disability design, which often reifies these tropes. Your empathy has gotten the story wrong too often. It falls back into tropes and simulation where you imagine what it would be like without actually knowing any of the context. So there's my email. If you would like to send me like angry thoughts about this, I accept those as well as kind ones. I also, in the slide deck, highly recommend the Disability Visibility Project, which has a website, which has a Twitter, because Alice Wong is awesome. One of my favorite cyborgs. I keep a website where I tell you things, and some of them are okay, but I have links to better things than mine. Catalyst had a Crypt Technoscience special issue. That's amazing. The Disabled List, which is curated by Liz Jackson and Alex Haggard and some others, is also highly worth checking out. There are some terms that I like: cryptorgery, triborgery, crypt technoscience, transmobility, technoableism's mine, and meta-eugenics that STS disability people are throwing around right now that are fun to Google. If you are actually interested in talking about language, Autistic Hoya, which is Lydia XC Brown, they have a wonderful guide here. All right, I misspelled things, but let's not focus on that. There are people getting this right. And here's a picture of my dog to stop on. In space. All right, I'm gonna stop share. Hey, now I can see you. Hi there. So someone in the chat is asking me about universal design. Oh, I was like, there's another question, but it was my own question. Okay, so universal design, which includes the design for all mindset. What types of technologies for individuals with disabilities do you feel is needed? Let's say for cognitive and or language disabilities, or alternative and augmentative communication technologies. So I like the idea of design for all. It's a great ideal to aspire to. I think it's never going to be fully realized, even though it's a wonderful idea. So building in flexibility and realizing not everyone's going to want to use the technology the way you planned is actually really important part of like testing out and thinking about universal design and thinking about including different disabled participants of all sorts. It's still, I mean, whenever I think about universal design, I think about, the little bumpy pieces on curb cuts. You know how it's tactile paving is what it's called, but curb cuts will have little bumps on them sometimes. And if you're a person who uses crutches, those bumps are terrible because it sends the tip out in the wrong way. But we really want the bumps there because we don't want blind people to walk into traffic. So in some ways, crutch users have to take this sort of like, it's going to be an awkward time to take the curb cut, and it might be harder to wheel around as well. And I know people who actually have had the bumps might set off their seizures, right? But the sort of thing that's been negotiated is we're going to have the bumps, and it's because like mortal danger will come to blind people crossing the street if we don't include the bumps. So while I think it's great and I like the principles for design in general, I also want to talk about the limits about universal design a lot of times. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ashley, for a lot of threads to pick up on there. And I encourage others who have questions, please do put those in the chat, and Ashley can see them and I can see them, and we can raise them. That was a question I had as I was listening to you as well. Was I've interacted with some folks in the user experience research communities, and there's a lot of talk there nowadays about again, designing with disability instead of designing for disability. There's a number of different places where that can go wrong, right? In some cases, it's the ideation phase that doesn't even consider the disabled person as a potential, user of the product, right? Then there's the testing phase as well. Is there, I don't even know if this is the right way to ask this question, but is there a better or more effective place to make the intervention in the design process?
I mean, it's so, I feel like oftentimes interest on the part of an engineer precedes user interest.
Mm-hmm.
And then and sometimes it's a way to get students really interested. People on my campus are hot on hand prosthesis, right? I see the designs put up by the first year engineering experience class where like there's a slideshow of all the hands they created. I've been invited to participate with one of the groups, and I was like, you guys know I'm a leg amputee. And they're like, and I'm like, I'm not going to be able to be I'm not a helpful user. Right. Are you sure you want me to come? And they still wanted me to. And I was like, okay. And then I spent the whole time sitting down with students and explaining why a lot of hand amputees don't wear their prostheses, even when you think you're designing a great thing. And I felt like such a villain that day. They had been given this assignment to build these things. And here I was telling them all the reasons that, if they wanted to enter into this space, they were going to need more than a leg amputee to get them there, right? Yeah, the tropes play into all technology. So even if you're not designing disability technology, I think about the ways in which AI is being deployed to monitor disabled people. I think about, one of my friends who worries that she doesn't take enough steps or takes too many steps each day. It's a real Goldilocks situation because the manufacturer of her prosthetic leg, it's a motorized or a computerized knee, counts her steps. And she's afraid her insurance will be denied next time she needs a leg if she doesn't walk enough. But if she walks too little, it might also be denied through insurance. So the sort of weaponizing of technology against us, and the talk about monitoring social media of disabled people to take away social security benefits and things like that is something people talk about. Electronic visit verification is the system used to monitor the hours of personal care attendants for people who have hours of personal care attendant through their states. A lot of people are concerned about privacy in that vein, particularly a trans disabled scholar that I know, will tell you that if his parents had known where he was during portions of his transition, it would have been danger to him and his abusive household, right? So having your location monitored all the time as a disabled person also shouldn't be allowed. I think a lot of the things that are happening with Fitbit and things like that, the worry is that the moochers and fakers trope is going to take a lot of us out because we're not disabled enough to deserve the interventions that we actually rely on to be as active as we are. So how do events such as the Paralympics and Special Olympics fit into this framework? It seems like there's an interesting combination of disabled people wanting to achieve personal goals while also fulfilling societal norms of inspirational stories. I think the Paralympics and Special Olympics are two different conversations. Right, I think there's a lot of, I can probably speak to the Paralympics better. So there's an Olympic and Paralympic committee, one committee. And it's both of those things. And Do you find watching sports things inspirational and exciting? Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't, I'm sorry. But some people do. And they would say, wow, those Olympians, their achievement is impressive, and appreciate different things about that. You could do the exact same things with Paralympians. I don't mind if you're inspired by sports people, because then you're actually treating them like normal athletes, right? Like that. That's great. Disability is being normalized in a particular way. Some of the conversations are real iffy that happen by people who have no disability background. But I think the Paralympics and, disability sports can be, I mean, a lot of them came up in the rehab movement, which is about getting people out of institutions and getting them back home and back into sports and back into life. So it has this longer history. But I don't have a problem. Like, that's great. Sure, be inspired by sports people if that's your bag. I find that a lot less offensive. Special Olympics is harder for me to speak on, and there's a lot of ableism against intellectually disabled people, which means that disability studies as a academic discipline doesn't even handle it very well. Just to talk like person first language, you almost have to use, because you do actually have to remind people that people with intellectual disabilities are people. Like for me, I mean, you don't even need to see person with amputee, right? It's not person with an amputation. That sounds like I need medical help, right? But amputees have been held up as inspirational war veterans for so long that the sort of stigma I see is a lot different. So I don't feel like I can actually speak to Special Olympics really well. My thing is, if people are enjoying it, let them enjoy it. And it seems fine from there. I mean, a lot of the coverage is what sticks in my craw there.
There was a question right above that one too,
Oh.
from Joel Bach, about a design studio.
Joel writes, I run a design studio for adaptive sports and rec equipment with 67 students. I try to teach them to use disability, use disability rather than disabled. But you use disabled quite extensively. Am I wrong in avoiding that term? Well, I see disabled, so I'm lots of things. Disabled is one of them. I do see it as a neutral descriptor. It's just what I am. So I don't try to avoid it, because if I tried to avoid it, you would have the sense that I thought something was wrong with it. And I don't think anything's wrong with being disabled. So yeah, yoinks. But I can see, depending on who you're designing with, different communities have different preferences. People really love adaptive sports equipment. One time in my class, I have a student who is a guide for blind skiers. He's fantastic. And a few years ago, I let them choose what they want to do for my class, because I'm a real loosey-goosey humanities person. Right now I'm making the engineer's group. They get to pick what they want to work on. Someone is about to have a fit on me. But he designed a different system to rig up blind skiers. Blind skiing involves like someone behind them, and like a harness situation to like let them know if they're going to run into a tree or something. And he like came up with a new design for that. But the purpose of the new design was like they could take more runs in a day because it took less time to like rig up. I mean, I think adaptive sports can particularly be a fun area to work in. That's awesome. Most technology is extremely costly. And if someone is not connected to an agent, the financial support is not available to people with disabilities, and it limits access. It becomes difficult for students to access technology. Do you have any suggestions for accessible computer technology? Whew. So it depends. So a lot of times different universities will have different packages subsidized. So my university, I can get read and write for free. I can get, so we have Ally for Canvas. I don't know if you guys have Canvas or Ally for Canvas. Without knowing the context, I don't know what you guys will have that's freer. People always promise cheaper and cheaper technology, but they just make new technologies. They don't maintain the old, and that's particularly the problem. Each upgrade can really set back a blind person who's trying to use a computer, unfortunately. I do have a suggestion for a book, which is a book called Making Computers Accessible, which is about this history. But I don't know that I have. I really like Otter if I'm doing live captioning for myself, and then I can edit the transcripts. I record all my lectures for class that way, and then I let any student who misses class have the recording, and it's gone pretty well. It's easy to correct the transcript there. But yeah, it's a little trickier. A lot of proprietary software really holds us back there too.
There was a question that came in when folks were registering. So this is a question related to some of the questions that have come before, but it reads, how can I be the best ally when there's no expert in the room? Could I share experiences of friends and family?
So yes. I think it's okay to speak up and say, well, this doesn't cohere with what I've heard or what experiences I know people are having. That seems reasonable. And some of the resources I put up are places that I think have good resources where if you're a non-disabled ally, you can find out more about different topics. I'm going to link you guys to my slides here because we have another question about sources. Share. Sorry, I'm looking at my screen instead of your face for a moment. There we go, copy link. Yeah, I really enjoy the Disability Visibility project for this because Alice Wong has a like StoryCorps, through NPR, where she's set up different disabled people to interview each other about different things. Sometimes it pertains to disability, or not to disability, all of it pertains to disability. Some of it actually pertains to technology. Hi, sorry, it is 9 o'clock here. So my brain just took a abrupt stop. But yeah, my Google Docs are there. I'm not sure if all my alt text followed from where I was copying pasted from, but I'll correct it tomorrow morning.
And this was recorded or is being recorded. So if it's possible to make it available for folks afterwards, with your permission, of course, the alt text will show up there as well.
Yeah, I'm also putting in the chat at 10 a.m. tomorrow, which is noon my time, but 10 a.m. your time, I have office hours, and I'm copying and pasting the Zoom if anyone wants to talk one-on-one about disability technologies, since my students never show up. I'm free then, is what I know. So from 10 to 11 tomorrow.
I know that feeling. It was just staring at a Zoom screen during office hours during this time.
I fell asleep during my office hours last week, but no one came. So it was fine. Now that I'm home and I can just lean back in my comfy chair,
Well, I do want to be respectful of your time, and so if folks do have other questions, please get those in. But I had one question that I wanted to ask about kind of the historical perspective on disability and disabled people in the United States, I guess, is just kind of the context that we have. But has disability shifted over time as social expectations around kind of normative participation in society have shifted? Like relations of production shifting, does that change the calculus for disabled identities, for the kind of does it change some of the stereotypes and some of the tropes that get deployed around disability?
Well, so we have to think about disability as a social construction. That doesn't mean it's not real. Amputees and blind people have existed in every human society. There are little people all over history, but being considered in the same category hasn't always been the case. Before plantation work and before industrialization in the United States, we don't really have the same sense of what constitutes disability. Disability under these contexts is either people who can work hard on a farm all day, or once we hit the age of industrialization, people who can stand at a machine and do heavy labor all day. Disability is not the same thing as impairment, right? Lots of people wear glasses. They don't experience, outside of a few movies where people are mocked for being four eyes or something like that, and that's a weird trope itself. People can be impaired and not be considered disabled. You also have situations where you would never know someone was disabled, right? In a world where everyone's illiterate, there are no dyslexics. Right? That doesn't mean dyslexia is not real. It just means you never find out that, in fact, something was different about you. We have different, school environments that make disability categories more salient. When you ask people to sit down for 8 hours a day, some people are better sitting off 8 hours a day. In fact, that's a good job for them. But you have people on the other end of the spectrum where sitting still for 8 hours a day is not a problem, or is a problem. The different materials we use. I've been thinking a lot about the new disability status situations we're going to see with Zoom. I've been thinking about which disabled people are particularly impacted by this type of learning, right? Even though it's like wonderful for a wide variety of disabilities, and my students who have had trouble getting to class because of chronic pain and things like that are like, oh my God, I don't have to figure out a parking spot. I can just open up my laptop, turn off my camera, and lay in bed with my heating pad and listen to the lecture. And all of a sudden I'm not behind in school, right? What this new format means is we're abling and enabling and doing this weird work around people's bodies during this time too. I forgot the original question.
I think you answered it. I mean, it was the point about disability being socially constructed, and that it sort of it does shift over time, or perceptions and well, there was a related question I had about visibility and disability, and I kind of related back to the parking spot anecdote that you told at the beginning of your talk. I'm someone who studies or have studied mental illness and mental illness treatments as part of my research. And there's a stigma that a lot of people with a mental illness face, is that, again, it's that folks don't believe them or something because it's not visible. It's not, it's not there observable on the outside. And I wonder, is there kind of a catch-all for approaching the verbs? The verbs are slipping on me too. It's only 7 here, but they're slipping on me. But yeah, is there a catch-all approach for disability and disabled persons, or is it more of a perhaps designing one approach is ineffective?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many different ways to be disabled. And I say that as a happy thing, and a thing that's probably really frustrating as an answer. I don't think there's any, outside of always listening to the people who it impacts, and, not listening necessarily to their parents or caregivers. I find that to be what people think they're doing the right thing because they heard from someone's mom that this was the thing that they wanted. My mom still doesn't know everything I would want or dream of. I mean, I know it from all the weird striped shirts. I don't wear stripes that she gives me over the years. Our parents and our caregivers and our friends and family don't have the same sense that we do. So I think it's really important to talk to the communities it affects. And that doesn't mean parents, which is often the default. Disabled people are often infantilized and talked over, and where is your caregiver, where is your parent is a thing. Also, people are kept in perpetual youth, right? You're always referred to as a kid until you're not, and then you're an old person. It goes one or the other. I mean, the middle part of disability is real tricky there. No, I do think about the cost of technologies related to this or not. Right now I'm sitting on a walker. It's a delight. I love my walker. It is $75. And every time I order a new one, it's slightly better. And this is a technology other amputees make fun of me for. They're like, why aren't you using at least forearm crutches? At least that would be better. But you are in your 30s. You should not use a walker. But in fact, a walker's great. I can sit on it. I can go real fast on it, because I can rest my shorter leg on it and kick off one leg and just fly. It would make the manufacturers very upset to see me use it that way. But I feel there's a lot of devalued technologies in the space too. And I'd love to see us destigmatize. What we need is sports stars to take up forearm crutches and walkers. That's the only way they're going to get cooler. So if anyone knows anyone in the NBA, that's your job now.
Or Instagram influencers, that they also could really play a good role.
I mean, it's true, but I think if you had a sports person, like a big deal sports person, all of a sudden showing off how he can move or she can move with forearm crutches, whew,
Yeah.
we'd get like, and people would save their wrists and their fingers. You can get like lack of sensation at the end of your fingers from using underarm crutches. It's wild.
Yeah. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you so much for your time, your insights, your presentation here. I think this has been useful for all of us, and a lot to think about. And I hope that some folks join you for. Oh, Joel, you have a question.
Yeah, Joel. Or a high five. It could have been a high five.
That might have been it. Yeah. Yeah, and I know it's getting late there in Virginia, so on the East Coast. So I think please go enjoy your evening. And
thank you so much for hosting me.
Office hours tomorrow.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, everyone.
No problem. Okay.
Oh, thank you so much. Isn't Zoom, there's parts of that we've like managed to make socially lovely on Zoom, and that's the part, like I like the part where there's waving and then people are like thank you, and this is
it's a new sociality, right?
I don't hate every part of it. Right. Honestly, the disability community has been lit this summer. There's been so many virtual events because now that this is the default, like a whole bunch of people who could never attend things or travel, now that you don't have to travel, you can like accept invites to things. And it's great. It's also exhausting. I've gone to more talks in the past 3 months than I have like at any point in my life. Not giving them, just listening. Obviously, I'm not doing this every day of the week.
Well, that would take it out of very quickly.
You saw me already losing words at this level, so yeah.
Well, Zoom fatigue is a real thing. It is.
It is. One of my friends is writing about the phenomenology of Zoom, because why wouldn't a philosopher do that? And it really is the being on all the time.
I'm curious if you're familiar with one of my advisors in grad school was Tom Belsdorf. He's done some work around within virtual worlds, disabled communities in virtual worlds.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, the name sounds familiar. I couldn't place it at this hour.
I can forward to you if you're interested. But,
yeah. No, I've been thinking about that a lot. There's the same person I met who had all these concerns about electronic visit verification. He also runs a Twitch stream that he games on, and it's his main form of sociality. So, like, he hasn't been out of his house since 2019 because he's a homebound disabled person in ways that few of us are. But like, he invites people to come hang out with him on Twitch all the time, and it's really cool.
All right. Well, okay. Right. We should wrap it there, right? Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sandy. I hope your cats are okay and that they're on your counters, because I would find that humorous. All right.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.